maybe one of the reasons so many people in the church aren't making disciples of all nations is because they're not really disciples in the first place. You think about Jesus and his disciples from the very beginning to the very end. Making disciples was in the DNA of this thing, right? To be a disciple involved making disciples. Follow me, Matthew 4, and I will, what? I'll make you fishers of men.
Never make a gospel appeal to people's emotions. Never. Never. That's why we don't have some kind of an emotional appeal here and play all kinds of schmaltzy music in the background.
And it amazes me that we believe this, that God would crush and kill his own son, but let you slide. Not for a minute.
At this moment, God commands all men to repent and believe that today is the day of salvation, that you are to flee from the wrath to come, to flee from the law of Moses that condemns you into the city of refuge, who is Jesus Christ our Lord. Run to him.
And welcome to another edition of G220 Radio. This is Mike, and I am with Nathaniel Porter, and we are here. The other two are just busy with life things going on, so they weren't able to join us, and that would be Ricky and George. So, Nathaniel, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It was a tough day at work, but I'm excited for the show. I did my homework. The dog didn't eat it, and so I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready to roll now.
Yeah, I wasn't for sure if I was going to be able to do the show and cancel it, because I've been sick for the last couple of days, and I felt really horrible this morning. And actually, George talked to me yesterday. He was like, "Man, you sound really bassy." But for some reason, here in the last several hours, that I started feeling better and can think and not feel lightheaded. So I didn't cancel it.
Sick. That would have been the coup de grace of otherwise not that pleasant of a day.
Yeah. So, but this last week we talked about Flood the Sidewalk, and we talked about humility in the Christian life. That was the show. That was what Nathaniel was going to preach on Flood the Sidewalk. So, Nathaniel, how did that go?
Man, it was really cool. We had a slew of people and a lot of preachers. So there were three guys from Canton that came up and joined us. Actually several, but the three I'm thinking of are Adam Wright, Blake Fogel, and Nathan Wright. And those three were a big help because we preached out front. So the way that preterm's set up is there's a street out front, Shaker Boulevard, that it's on, and then like a little alley in the back. And so when we go there from on the regular, we'll preach sometimes in the front, and then the waiting room's around back. So we'll go around back and preach in the alley too. But this time, since there was those three guys were with us, we had them preaching out back to the waiting room while we had the speaker set up out front. We had the four main speakers speaking out front and all this preaching going on. So it was just really cool. The death scorts got a lot of Jesus. I didn't see anything like everyone chose life or whatever. Like, that's not why we go. We go to preach Christ, and we hope that someone will hear the message and benefit from it and be converted. And we hope babies get saved, but it doesn't always happen. And so if you go to save babies, you're going to burn out really quick. But if you go to exalt Christ, that's the only way you can really last in that kind of work. But I mean, he is faithful. There's people across the nation that do what we do at abortion clinics, and there's been babies saved at preterm, and so he is faithful. And I mean, I just was listening to a sermon where pastor mentioned a story of a guy getting converted in old age from a sermon that he had heard 81 years prior. So it's like every word that you put out doesn't return void. So it was just a real great day of fellowship with the believers and everything, and preaching God in Christ.
Yeah. Now, for our YouTube listeners, you probably, or viewers, you just probably saw, I forgot to change the title. This is episode 393. We've titled it Rejoice in the Wife of Your Youth with that. And so we thank Nathan for that update on Flood the Sidewalk. I know if you go to G220 Ministries YouTube channel, you can catch all the preaching.
Yeah.
Ricky's been posting those up in the last couple days. And I think you can also go to the G220 Ministry Facebook page for the live streams of those there and watch them there. So there's two different avenues. If you wanted to hear the main preachers, you can go to those two outlets and be able to view and hear and listen to all of those sermons there. And so, but tonight we are going to go to Proverbs 5, and we've titled the show Rejoice in the Wife of Their Youth, because this is what is kind of the main point of this passage.
Right.
With it, now we do want to say on the front end, and we'll probably say it before we get to it, there is some language that may not be suitable for younger audiences. Obviously, we will try to keep it at the plane of how the Bible speaks about things and not to shy away with it. But we just do want to know there may be some words and concepts that may be not suitable for younger audiences, although we'll try to use double entendres and stuff like that to try to coat and cover it a little bit for that. And so here we are, 5th chapter of Proverbs, about halfway through the first section of Proverbs, which is chapters 1 through 9. We've learned that the main thesis of this book, if we could call it that, is to gain wisdom, and that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that there's only really two classes of people. There's those who fear the Lord and the fools who despise it, and who will ultimately be destroyed because of their folly. And so we've seen in and out of these other chapters just different ways that Solomon has exhorted us, encouraged us, has given us bad examples, given us good examples, and tried to get us to think about wisdom and where wisdom comes, why we need wisdom, and how wisdom benefits us. And in reality, because wisdom comes from God, God is the source of wisdom. He's given us wisdom to live in His world, and the only way to make sense and to live in His world is to live according to His wisdom. But not only that, we have the wisdom in front of us when we think of Christ as the embodiment of all wisdom. He displays wisdom perfectly. He is wisdom Himself in all those ways. And so, again, we'll see that again this week here in Proverbs chapter 5. Got anything else to say?
No, it's exciting. There's we've got the good path, the wife of the youth, and we're going to get introduced to a new character in the story of Proverbs right now. You ready to take off, Mike?
Let's do it. Sorry, I forgot to shut my door. When no dog waking up and barking.
All right. We're going to go 1 to 6, right?
7.
7. Okay. My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, and your lips reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of shale. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. Now then, my sons, listen to me and do not depart from the words of my mouth.
So I think one thing we should note is the repetition of Solomon's pleas.
Right.
He, this idea of being attentive, to incline the ear, to keep discretion, to guard knowledge, is all repeated themes we've already seen throughout the book. In fact, kind of every chapter starts that way.
Right.
In that way, that force to understand and to go, just not say kind of as Jesus would, but instead of as Jesus would say, that let those who hear, let those who see
Right.
understand, to actually observe and to keep and to gain and to practice wisdom, because wisdom is for all of life.
Right. This is like the way these chapters start. It's almost like when you teach a kid to ride a bike or he's learning to walk. All right, son, now keep your eyes on me. Keep your eyes on me, And so as this son is learning the ways of wisdom, learning the path of life, his dad keeps saying, now, son, keep your eyes on me. Pay attention. So you don't fall. He doesn't want the son to fall. And so it's like you said, this isn't just nice things to pull Instagram shares from. Like, this is incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion. So you take this and do something with it, son.
Yeah. And this is important as he continues on. Now, we might find maybe some irony here that Solomon, with all of his wives and concubines, is telling his sons what he's about to say. And, we can talk about Solomon's downfall on a different show. But really, we have to grasp this before we move on and to understand it. Because what we're going to see for most of this chapter is something bad that we are called to not do and to not go after. So that wisdom here, so you learn from other people's mistakes. There is wisdom in that statement to be observant and to see, okay, don't do that. That's going to not end well. And basically what we're going to see here in the rest of this chapter is that applied to a very specific case of adultery.
Right. Yeah. And if you think about it too, you don't, there's that story about Thomas Edison saying he learned 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. But you don't look at Edison, every light bulb manufacturer that came after, and so who are you to tell me you failed 1,000 times at making a light bulb? You know what I mean? So like, whenever you stand on the shoulders of giants, whenever you learn from your teachers, you know that they've failed, and so that they know a lot of wrong ways not to live, and so you can trust their advice, almost like it takes one to know one, and they've been there, and so they're older, they're wiser, they've taken the lumps, and so you can trust them.
Yeah. And so we get into verse 3, where he talks about the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, her speech is smoother than oil. Verse 4, but the end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Just the imagery of this forbidden woman.
Right.
It's a woman that the son cannot have. But,
yeah,
just think about you can feel the temptation in it. The lips drop honey. She has smooth speech like oil. You can, when you start thinking about these characteristics, and part of this goes to I mean, the serpent in the garden, he was cunning. He had smooth words. He was very enticing. Did God really say that you should surely die?
Right.
You know,
I
if
mean,
you
he
eat of
didn't
it.
he didn't tempt him to disobey God with the rest of the trees. He picked the one that they weren't supposed to eat from to issue the
Yeah.
temptation. So I mean, the tempter Satan doesn't come to us and say, "Man, doesn't your wife look good?" You know what I mean? Like he goes with the woman you're not supposed to have to make you covet and fall into sin. Because I mean, the path that you're not supposed to be on is that greener grass.
Yeah. And to note that just the progression of how these two verses go, and even verses 5, her feet will go to death, her steps will follow to the path of Sheol, and she does not ponder the path of life, so she's foolish in herself. To consider that her ways are wandering and she does not know it. That there is this, while adultery is the primary focus of this chapter, this is how all sin works.
Right.
Sin looks good. Sin makes me feel better at the moment, but it never ends well.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think we should, in our day of age, press in this application of adultery because of the hypersexualized culture we're in.
Right.
Well, but understanding that he's using a powerful an example to show that all sin work in this way. That's what
Right.
makes Adam and Eve. Even when we think of Cain of Abel, Cain is in a position to not sin. I mean, he's affected by the fall, obviously. So there's a part of it's not to understanding that, but how the story plays out is that it seemed better and to deal with his jealousy to get rid of his brother, as if his
Right.
brother was the cause of his jealousy.
Mm.
But in the end, he suffers further abandonment away from God and abandonment from his family.
Right. And I mean, how many times is the temptation, whether it's to a piece of cake sitting on the counter or something even more heinous, how many times is the solution to the temptation seems like it's to give in, right? But it's like this this adulteress. She seems good at the end. She seems good at first, like you'll be satiated, but in the end, your tummy's bitter because you just ate a bunch of wormwood, and even worse, she leads you down to death.
Yeah.
So you think that if I could just have this one time, this will be the last time, and I'll be satisfied. But then it's just like it's this constant craving.
Yeah. And yeah, the notice of that sin and this forbidden women, this adultery always ends in disaster.
Right.
No matter how, I mean, I've never heard anyone kind of, or at least hear stories of adulterous relationships that where the husband and wife just leave on mutual terms and they're not angry with each other. That's just not something happens. So you see in the adultery the devastation of sin, how it wrecks families, and if there's
Right.
kids in this family, it destroys their lives.
Right.
Their parents aren't together. They're no longer in a home that is one father and one mother raising up their kids, which statistically, not that we have to use statistics in the end because it's how God has ordained it, but statistically tend to have more problems. Whether it's school or grades, or I guess that'd be the same thing, or even just moral choices, and what they do because of the devastation of one person's sin. with it.
Right.
And so we should realize it, that adultery here, I mean, her feet goes down to death. It is as, I mean, you're not literally dying in those acts, but the idea of death, it doesn't produce joy. It doesn't produce
Right.
life. It produces
Yeah.
hatred and death. It's a destruction of life.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what Jesus said. I have come that you may have an abundance of life. And so the opposite of Jesus is death. I mean, you feel, no doubt, I used to lead a promiscuous lifestyle in my old life, and you feel dead inside, especially once you realize that what you've done. You don't. I've never been married, so I couldn't tell you about that. But there's no satisfaction or fulfillment, even whenever you are purportedly in love with someone. It's not. There's always that shame and that growtiness, and it's not like a living, fruitful relationship like a marriage would be.
Yeah. And then you just think about who she is. Not only the direction she leads you, she shows herself to be a fool, one that does not ponder the path of life.
Right.
She's not considering her own actions involved in this too, and the destruction it brings.
Right.
And so you have this woman who entices destruction and doesn't even ponder how her life is being destroyed in the same actions in which she is partaking in.
Right. And I mean, her ways are unstable. She doesn't know it. That really has to be the only way that a person can sin. We see in Romans 1, it says they suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And if you really could grasp fully without suppressing it, exactly what you're doing when you're sinning and without suppressing it, I mean, like, it would leave you utterly undone. And so the only way to sin is to not ponder the path of life. You just don't think about it. I'm going to put that far from me. I'm going to do what I want to do. Otherwise, you'd be undone.
Yeah. So now, Solomon moves from telling us about this woman, who she is, into, you guys said verse 6, and I said no, 7, but it was verse 6.
Okay.
I wasn't thinking right. I made a mistake. There we go.
Yeah, it's fine.
Into kind of what the young man should be doing.
Yeah. But just really quick before we leave this section, Mike, I wanted to make a couple of cultural observations. Even within Christian circles, we see, and definitely in the culture with feminism and stuff like that, we see men are the predators and men are these ones with sexual urges, and men are the sinful ones. And in Christian circles, we see all women as little damsels in distress. I still somehow don't believe that women sin, but I know that's incorrect. And that's just kind of like a cultural lie, but we see right here. And I mean, you can say that you can apply this to adulterous men too, like to tell your daughters, but we just dealt with sinful men in the last chapter. So this is very distinct, that this is a different picture of the wayward woman than we would get in society. You know what I mean? Like, women can be bad too. And so that's just my first cultural observation. And then my second cultural observation, I was listening to the Sheologians podcast this morning, and an idea that that's so prevalent in my culture is this idea that this adulterous woman, she's not bad. She's not a bad woman. She's an empowered woman. She's empowered, and so our culture at large is trying to remove the shame, all the shame that should accompany an act of sexual immorality, and turning it into this empowerment. You know what I mean? Have you seen any of that, Mike?
I mean,
not obviously maybe in the circles you associate with, but maybe you've seen it in the culture.
I mean, yeah, isn't that the thing of feminism? The
Yeah,
irony there is, that she's being oppressed by men, you know, and so she needs to liberate this certain lifestyle that they promote. Planned Parenthood promotes it, because
yeah,
that's how they make their money and whatnot. And yet, that is the one thing that destroys
right.
them. They're on one hand, they're like, well, we should be able to dress the way we want to, look the way we want to, and not be objectified in that. But yet at the same time, they do things that objectively makes them objectified objects, and how
Yeah,
they want to do it. And so, and understanding that, I mean, Solomon here is writing to his son, so he's using a
right,
woman as the example. But this cuts both ways. This is
right,
not
right, right.
just, just about guys. That women do fall in the same types of
Yeah, there,
temptations.
there,
And
there are
so,
the Casanova types that do the same thing. Like I don't want to say that, but
yeah,
um, women can be bad too, and I think that is a cultural thing that we have built into us. That no, they're not. They're the fairer sex and stuff.
yeah,
But
that would
yeah,
be
so,
intersexuality, because you're a male and she's a female. She's oppressed, and therefore, if you
right.
want to see how that
I
plays out,
sorry,
hey, I'm
I
just
I forgot to check my privilege this morning. My
yeah,
bad. Let's move on.
okay.
All right, where are we reading to
Verse
now?
7 to 14.
All right. Now then, my sons, listen to me and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her and do not go near the door of her house, or you will give your vigor to others and your years to the cruel one. And strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien. And you groan at your final end, when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. I have not listened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation.
So it's quite a powerful. Think about, again, he's coming out, he's stressing, listening to him, to his words, not to depart from him. With that, and verse 8 comes in, stay away from her.
Yeah,
You know,
that's parallel to 4:15. Whenever he said, avoid the way of the evil men, avoid it, do not pass by it, turn from it and pass on. So
yeah,
I mean, sin's not something to mess around with. Just get away from it. I had written down for verse 8. We had in 1 Corinthians 6:18, he says, flee sexual immorality. And 2 Timothy 2:22, Paul tells his protege, flee youthful lusts. So this is not like, this might be a good time for the Christian liberty talk. It's like a lot of times with Christian liberty, we think, oh, what can I get away with? When in reality, it's what do I have a right to flee away from? You know what I mean?
yeah. You also got 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. For this is the will of God. In case you're all wondering, found it. Here's the will of God. It's this, your sanctification. That's the will of God. And he gives them 2 points. That you abstain from sexual immorality. That each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passions of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. Like we see here, as you're mentioning, that Solomon is recognizing his sons. She's tempting. You want to get drawn into it. And so what do? You go away from her. You set boundaries. You don't go near. You do what you need to do to not do it anymore, to not have that temptation.
Was that Pastor Mitch's sermon where he said, "Don't go up to her house and knock on the door to see if she's home"? Was that him?
He might have. I don't know. This was several weeks ago when he preached on this.
Yeah.
So I don't know his. While he does most of my preps for these shows because he's working through this, I don't remember everything he says. But he might. That was something he would say, though. But yeah, just to go. And, Jesus has stronger words to cut off your right hand.
Right.
If it causes you to sin. He's not exactly dealing with adultery at that point. But the point still stands on the sin to do it. Because there's consequences. Sin has consequences.
Right.
And we don't have to go far to hear about adulterous affairs in politics that have destroyed people's careers.
Right.
Maybe not the current president's career, and he kind of, with that, but other politicians have no doubt suffered great dishonor because of extramarital affairs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a changing world. It's a brave new world. So maybe we won't see that as much now. But I know in the past, like we had that aptly named Anthony Weiner had that sex scandal where you're just sending pictures, and so, I mean, it doesn't even have to. Judge Kavanaugh or Justice Kavanaugh almost got undone by a false accusation. Like this stuff's serious.
Yeah, I don't think it will be undone. I think just the light of nature in man.
Yeah,
in which, we know it's wrong. Even those who maybe will try to not promote it in it, but we can see that. Oh, I guess you see the path that leads, and especially in Solomon's case, he's talking to his son who will become king.
Yeah.
So he's going to lose his honor. Strangers will take their fill of your strength. I mean, he's going to be overrun. Your laborers go to the house of a foreigner. I think you still get this idea of being taken over by another country. He's losing his country. And then he has this regret at the end of his life and how much he's hated reproof and discipline, which has caused him to get to this point in his life.
All right.
And I don't have any experiences, but you hear like people having regrets, on their deathbed. They didn't live. They wish they lived a fuller life. They wish they cared about the things that matter, which is why the Bible tells us to number our days.
Yeah.
To think about our days, to be fruitful in them. Obviously, as being sinful creatures, even though we're justified, we don't always do that to the fullness we are called to, and there's grace there. But this is what, he's telling his son. Like, you need to think about your days. You need to think about the consequences of your actions. It might not be right away, but it will later come. Kind of an idea in the elementary school on Wednesday, elementary school class I teach at our church on Wednesdays. We're going through the Keach's Catechism or the Baptist Catechism, and it talks about those who profane the Word of God, and that they may not suffer punishment on earth, but God will not leave them without punishment in heaven.
Right.
And that, obviously it's worded weird, and that's how it's kind of worded. But the idea of that God will punish them in heaven. And so this is the same, we need to consider that our consequences of our actions take place, and we may not fully realize the problems we've caused, but God by no means will let the guilty escape judgment. He
Right.
will bring it onto them. And so this foolish person who engages with this foreign woman, this forbidden woman, who he will basically lose everything, and his life will be a regret. I should not have done that.
Yeah.
And we know that in Corinthians there are two types of repentance: those who get caught and they seem repentant because they've been caught, and
Right.
those who are truly repentant to the Lord. And so we see here really this man on his deathbed as one who kind of saw that he got caught in his sin as he reflects on it when he's about to die, because of all the things that he did to harm himself and to bring death upon him instead of life.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like a life wasted. One of the commentaries, this you'll give your years to the cruel one. You realize maybe in a worldly way, but you realize the things that you've wasted. And I mean, in the Christian, for me, it's like, I realized what I was like in my youth, and I was giving my years, my early years, my my teens and early 20s, I was giving to the cruel one. I was serving Satan rather than God, and he's not a very kind master. He's a cruel master, and you give those years of your prime to somebody who doesn't love you and who will not be able to reward you in the end, because there is no reward for those kind of deeds. It's like you wasted. It's like you wasted precious time. Something I was thinking about too with verse 10, strangers will be filled with your strength. I'm not entirely certain that this means this in the most immediate context, but I was just thinking of how the sin of adultery can give people power over you. You see someone who goes from a powerful figure, especially with the Me Too thing as of recent years. They go from a powerful figure to suddenly they're the weakling, and everybody else has something to hold over their head, or perhaps it's you're not getting found out in a big way like some of these people, like we talked about politicians and stuff getting Me Too'd, but what you are is you're just a regular run-of-the-mill adulterous husband, and your mistress wants to tell your wife or wants to tell everybody, and she's got the power now to get whatever she wants from you in order to stay quiet. And so whenever you're engaged in these sinful secretive sordid affairs, you're giving your strength away for someone to control you with. And I mean, even if that's not in the immediate context, I think that's a definite point of application.
I mean, you hear it, blackmail. I mean,
Yeah.
Isn't that essentially what sometimes that comes down to? I have something, and so, I'm going to extort money from you to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Because you've done something wrong. You don't keep it a secret if it's right.
Right.
People don't blackmail you for helping old ladies across the street or giving lots of money.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I know you're going to do it. Which, I guess, if you're a Christian, that might be something. Because you're not supposed to let your left hand know what your right hand is doing when you're helping the poor. But,
Right.
It's just the idea of blackmail is always, you've done something bad, a murder you committed, and someone knows it, has the evidence, so give me money. You have that type of mentality. But
Right.
also, thinking about it, just his regret.
Yeah.
What is the one thing Solomon is pushing his son And what God is trying to push to us through this is that he's telling his son to listen to him, to gain wisdom. And the person who goes after the forbidden woman and who falls, his regret is that he hated discipline, that he didn't listen to his instructors, his teachers, which is what Solomon has been calling him and his wife to his son, that they're his instructors.
Right.
And so we see the regret is that they didn't listen to wisdom. They didn't listen to how to work in this world. And so they fell for this forbidden woman who's now destroyed their life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you you have a fortune teller that tells you this is how your life's going to unfold. But if you do this, then it'll unfold this way. And then you do it the way that she says not to. Only in this case, it's wisdom instead of a fortune teller. And it's like Solomon's got his son's number. If he doesn't follow the wisdom, this is what's going to happen to you. You know what I mean? It's like I can see your future unfolding before you. You have two paths. You can either go down the path of life, or you can go down the path to utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation with regret.
Yeah. So, you got anything else?
I just had one more interesting thing I learned when I was looking at give your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien. Hollywood makes $10 billion a year. Like, how much, if you already know, then you might already know, but how much money a year do you think the porn industry makes?
I know it's quite a bit more than that.
Yeah, it's $15 billion. So even what we may think of as small sexual sin, there's a lot of money that people are giving away to an alien, to a foreigner, for this kind of adultery. You know, that's just like a final statistic, I guess, to polish off that section.
Yeah. Here's another thing, with that, is that the porn industry invests a lot of money in new technologies, including virtual reality. So not only they make a lot of money, they're also on the forefront of moving technologies in order to be able to be there when it becomes common. So like they're in front of like Hollywood when it comes to videos with virtual reality aspects in it. And so people may not understand how much the porn industry drives technology.
Yeah.
At least in the audio video frame with it, which includes, now the internet and all that other. It is
that's wild,
truly
man. That's
astonishing their reach that we can't even completely fathom.
Yeah, anyways. I mean, like they're the adulterous woman on super steroids.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess maybe that could be a whole show in and of itself, but that's just wild where we've gotten to.
Yeah.
Let's go to some good news. We've heard a lot of bad news. Let's move on.
So just for our listeners, this is where we mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is kind of where some of the language comes up that you may not have with your little ones around. Obviously, it's your choice. We just want to give you a heads up on what that is. And just our commitment to try to keep it as clean as possible. In that way.
All right, we going to the end of the chapter?
Yeah, go into the chapter.
All right. Drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be yours alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breasts satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress, and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. He will die for lack of instruction, and the greatness of his folly he will go astray.
Yeah, so the good news. The title of the show, as you can see, Rejoice in the Wife of the Youth. And so, we see in this section, and something that is repeated in Ecclesiastes quite a bit, to rejoice in the wife of your youth, to be, as Paul would say, a husband of one wife.
Right.
And to live a life dedicated to your wife, to be filled with her, to adore her, to have the proper relationship with her.
Yeah, I mean, this several times in Scripture, the argument from creation gets used. Just the one that Jesus uses whenever he talks about divorce, and he quotes Genesis 2, 24 and 25. So God makes Adam a beautiful bride. Adam sings, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and then Moses tells us, for this reason, a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And so King James, I think, says cleave to a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave with his wife. And so you're supposed to be joined from all of creation onward to your one wife, this wife of your youth. God makes Adam a wife, and he rejoices in her. He sings the first love song, praise song about his wife. This is supposed to be a joyful thing. It's not like a lot of the times in sitcoms and in other guy movies, I guess you call them. It's always getting hitched to the old ball and chain. But this is supposed to be a joyful thing, and not that marriage, I'm told, is without. Not that marriage would be without struggles and sanctification and growing, but it's supposed to be a joyful thing. That you have found what is good. If he finds a wife, finds what is good, and so all of your exhilaration, you should find yourself year after year being more enchanted with this woman.
Yeah, and just the notice of just the intimacy you are to be filled with her. You
Right.
hear it at times today to do it, to scatter your springs or your streams of water in the streets, so that you know what you like and don't like, and
Sowing your wild oats.
Yeah, this idea that you have to do that to know.
Right.
But the Bible is clear that even if you're not married and you're doing these things that should only be done by a married couple, that you are being led to this forbidden woman. And that in a way you're not going to know what it means to keep to drink from your own cistern, to be with your own wife, and with that, and there is many problems that have come out again when we consider statistics about people who cohabitate,
Right.
before getting married, and the destruction. I know a family and their marriage, they were engaged in planning and engaged in intimacy before their wedding, and it had effects even on their own marriage, even though they were pledged to be married to each other. There was difficulties that came about because of their actions that one night. And so we need to just consider, that God gives you a wife and you to enjoy her, and that it is part of God's plan that you enjoy your wife if you have one. Then that all your, how to say it? Yes, it's difficult, but at the same time, it's fulfilling.
Right.
With it.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about we talked in the last section about all this shame and regret and remorse and stuff that came from having from meeting up with the adulterous woman, and just all this regret and it's a path that leads to death. Something that really struck me as we're talking about rejoicing in your wife, your youth. Whenever I looked up that Genesis verse earlier to be able to cite it for the show, the very next verse, Genesis 2:25, is the verse that says, "The man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed." And so this marital union results in being able to be naked and intimate with each other, not just physically, but on a emotional and spiritual level, naked in front of each other and unashamed. And so a lot of what happens with adultery and fornication, or what have you, you're willing to be naked physically in front of each other, but you aren't willing to be emotionally naked or spiritually naked. And so there's no real intimacy with it. You know what I mean? Like it's this cheap knockoff that just spoils with time. Whereas marriage and the sex within the confines of marriage, there's somewhere, I think, where a woman, your wife's beauty, isn't it? It's compared to a fine wine or something. Maybe I'm thinking of a country song. But anyway, that you can be naked and unashamed with your wife. You can't do that with an adulterous woman. I mean, it's not there.
Yeah. And he ends this section then by saying, kind of giving you the why. In verse 21, he starts out with the idea of 4. And so he's concluding with it, and what he's saying is, don't do this. Listen to your teachers. Embrace the wife of your youth, because God sees all things. Right. He knows when you go to that forbidden woman. He says he ponders, or he observes, kind of examines all of man's path. He knows what you're doing when you think no one else knows. The God who is transcendent, who is omnipresent, sees.
Yeah.
And he knows. And he will by no means clear the guilty.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of his names, isn't it? El Roi, isn't that God sees and hears? I mean, that's it.
Maybe. I don't know.
You don't know God's names? You didn't have a plaque?
Yeah, I do know God's name. It's Yahweh.
Oh, okay. No, but that's that's what it's a Hagar. It's in the story of Hagar. Look it up. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Fans, you can write in with your complaints. No, but it's one of his characteristics he sees and hears. In Ecclesiastes, the last verse says he's going to bring every deed into account, every hidden thing, whether good or evil. So I mean, that's it. I mean, I think the great Reverend Johnny Cash said, "Sooner or later, God's going to cut you down." You know, I mean, it's he sees you in both for good and for bad. And then the chapter closes out. His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held by the cords of his sin. You think about the devil who was crushed by his own plan. The serpent's head was crushed by the head crusher. His own evil plan to crucify Jesus, the Son of God, ended up with his own destruction. Haman, in the book of Esther, builds a gallows for Mordecai, and his own plan comes back on him as his neck gets stretched there. Jesus said, "Whoever sins is sold as a slave to sin." Like, sin is no joke.
Yeah, as the great American thinker Jonathan Edwards said in a sermon, you're like a spider on its last web, on its last string above a fire, and that is God holding the sinner above the flames.
It's a good sermon.
It is a good sermon. That is a reference from Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. I encourage you to read it. He uses that illustration to show just the point of our sins, that sins have consequences. Every action has consequences. With that, sin will bear its proper fruit.
All right.
A thorn bush will not produce
Figs.
Throwing stuff on my desk now just to get water. Yeah, thorns don't produce figs, nor do fig trees produce thorns. You will receive what you sow. With that, and that's a poetic way of a less poetic way than what Solomon is talking here, because your iniquities will ensnare you, and you will die because you were not disciplined. You did not do what you were supposed to do. You know, and that kind of reminds me of this whole adulting concept. Like, oh, now I'm an adult. Like, I gotta do the adulting thing. Really, that should be the push of our life.
Right.
You know, not to be all bummed that I can't, you know, go sailing all the time, or, you know, develop this, you know, passive quote unquote income to live off of. But that being an adult is hard and difficult because you are to be trained and disciplined to deal with the reality of life. My daughter has it easy. She wakes up, she plays, she gets read to, people make food for her, she only has to sit down and eat it, and she goes to bed. Like, that is the lifestyle. And, you know, on the other hand, I'm trying to keep her alive. I'm the one who has to make the food for her because she can't, you know, being 3.5 years old, can't do it for herself. You know, but there's a time in which, you know, as a parent, I'm to discipline my children, to teach them discipline,
Right.
and to act. And it's hard and it's difficult. It's not easy. I don't like doing it. But not doing it will only destroy her life.
Right.
And to lead her in the path that will ensnare her and ultimately to her destruction.
Yeah, definitely. I know working in the schools, and this might even be a generational thing, but working in the schools, I had seen a lot of kids that were perishing for lack of instruction because their parents, or their parents' parents perhaps even, hadn't taken the time to instruct them, so they lacked the wisdom because nobody ever taught it to them. And once someone tried to present it to them, they spurned it, but that's a big part of life, is training up a child, discipline. Listen to your teachers, and if you know better, you got to be a teacher. If someone taught you, teach the next one, whether you're married with children or whether you're just some guy like me. Coffee you.
Yeah. I've been talking too much. So, which is good because we're at the end of the show. Any last comments? Questions?
I don't know. Sin's no joke.
Yep.
Train up your kids and stay on the path to life.
Yep. And flee from the forbidden woman.
Amen.
So that has been episode 393. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. Join us back next Tuesday for a thrilling and exciting topic that we have yet to discuss.
It's going to be exciting.
It's going to be a good one. With that, hopefully Ricky will be back. And,
my favorite thing, I'm going to tell you, my favorite thing to discuss is TBD.
So, I don't know. We're joking because me and Ricky were discussing on his page about, who are the sons of God, the sons of God are the daughters of men in Genesis 6, and we differ on that point. And so maybe that will be a show. I think it'll be an interesting conversation to have. Obviously I have my views. Ricky has his views. I don't know how dogmatic he is. I'll be willing to sway with it for that. But we don't know. It may even be Proverbs 6 next week if we don't want to get into that type of discussion. It is a with it for all it's worth for that. But I know we do have some other shows kind of on the back burning. Looking at doing a show on the teachings of multi-level marketing companies. And I know I haven't said much. My wife and I have been working through this, talking this. We need to get serious and start doing more studying. That there is a concern there. We don't, obviously we're kind of moving away from doing kind of just strict polemical stuff. But I think there's some concerns that as Christians we should be considering when dealing with so-called multi-level marketing, direct marketing, sales. And there are teachings that concerned my wife and now me. I binge listened to a podcast about it, and just the connections between multi-level marketing and what they're teaching and what has come out of the prosperity gospel, power of positive thinking, which is probably most knownly named by Robert Schuller, who's died in the last 10 years or so. With that, there's a great concern for it, and so we need to trying to get some study done and some more material. So we don't know when that show's coming out. But yeah, that's going to be hopefully a good show. And it's going to be, I think, a very important show in light of just my Facebook feed. I don't know about yours.
Nobody, I don't know. I've been trying to stop posting stuff on Facebook because I'm kind of a big mouth and I have a lot of opinions, and some of them come off half-baked, so I've been like writing them down in a little pad instead.
So, but Nathaniel, on a less adventurous note, wants to talk about atonement. So we're hoping to get that when George is back, because that's kind of been George's little, what he's been really studying on is the atonement, and specifically penal substitutionary atonement, why we think it's important, what does it actually mean and say about that. Plus, I know Ricky is still trying to get some of the pastors in the area for the 1689 series, and so we're working on different things to keep it lively and interesting with that. So this has been another episode of G220 Radio. We ask you to join us next week, same time, same place. We'll see you all later.
Toodles.
Maybe one of the reasons so many people in the church aren't making disciples of all nations is because they're not really disciples in the first place. You think about Jesus and his disciples from the very beginning to the very end. Making disciples was in the DNA of this thing, right? To be a disciple involved making disciples. Follow me, Matthew 4, and I will, what? I'll make you fishers of men.
Never make a gospel appeal to people's emotions. Never. Never. That's why we don't have some kind of an emotional appeal here and play all kinds of schmaltzy music in the background.
And it amazes me that we believe this, that God would crush and kill his own son, but let you slide. Not for a minute.
At this moment, God commands all men to repent and believe that today is the day of salvation, that you are to flee from the wrath to come, to flee from the law of Moses that condemns you into the city of refuge, who is Jesus Christ our Lord. Run to him.